1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by a new voice on the show. New voice, new face if you're watching on YouTube. I'm joined by Jason Kempf, the new voice of the Iowa Cubs. Jason, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Happy to be here. Happy to be, as you said, part of the Cubs organization for the first time after a lot of years, watching it from the outside.
No, I love it. I mean, this episode of the show is dedicated to you being in the system now. I mean, this is something that like I mentioned in the messages to you back and forth that like we got some nerds listening to this show, and whenever I say that, I mean that like as lovingly as possible. The people listening know that. I mean, like we dig into the weeds on the prospects in the system and tune into the Iowa Cubs and Myrtle Beach and everywhere in between as much as possible on a nightly basis. So I just thought it'd be awesome to get you on the show and introduce yourself. We'll do a long form introduction, more or less, and get to know you a little bit. And I know people are going to be listening to you on a daily basis throughout the season, which is super, super exciting. So I guess I'll go ahead and just dig right into it. I'm curious about your story and how, I guess, let's go all the way back, right? Like, how did you get into this career path? How did you become interested in broadcasting to begin with?
Yeah, that's a good place to start. And I think everybody has a really unique story. So for me, I grew up in just outside of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Fond du Lac is on the east side of Lake Winnebago, about halfway between Milwaukee and Green Bay. It's basically farm fields and barns, and there's a few small villages every 5 to 10 minutes. I'm talking no stoplights, no gas stations, none of that. You've got to drive a half hour to get to the store. So all that to say, there's not a lot going on where I'm from. So there were things that people did, and it was in the summer. As long as there wasn't snow on the ground, you played baseball. And so that's where I think my love for the game kind of started, was going to watch my dad play town ball, adult league baseball every Sunday, me playing on Friday nights. And then in high school, we had a group of kids from these small towns that come together to the same high school, and made the state tournament a couple of times, lost in the state championship game my senior year. And ideally I would have played as long as possible, but I realized, hey, that's not going to be the route that I can go in baseball. So I remember back, we would call somebody's phone at a house to get the voicemail. And then one of us would record each other describing play-by-play of two guys playing one-on-one in the backyard with basketball. So that was probably my first ever broadcast when I was 8 or 9, calling somebody's home phone, which is hard to think about nowadays, and then recording play-by-play on the voice machine and doing it that way. But fortunately, there's a good broadcasting school in Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. They have a phenomenal program. They have a student-run radio station there. We got to call games, interact with athletes, kind of learn TV and radio broadcasting, hosting sports talk shows. So that was where I really started to see this as a career. And that's when I was like, hey, people always said I talk too much. So why not combine two things together that I love?
Dude, I love that you would call the answering machine. And
I don't know how we thought of that, but it worked.
So cool. I love that, man. I think that there, like you said, like there's different ways in which people get into this, but I think that like the common thread in terms of broadcasters is they found different and often weird ways to speak about the game that they're watching at the time. Right? Like I know that like they play video games and they're speaking out loud the video games that are happening, and that was really popular during COVID when actual like broadcasters with a career in broadcasting did that. But like, that's so interesting to me. I love that.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people would understand what I'm even talking about if they're under 30. You might not know what a voicemail is or a voice answering machine, but yeah, it was a unique way. I don't know who came up with it, but we made it work.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think that I get it. I'm not quite 30, and so I get that reference. I think a few years younger than me, maybe not as much. We'll see. But there may be people in the comments saying, "What the hell is Jason talking about?" I have no idea what he's talking
That won't
about.
be the last time that happens.
So you spent before coming over here to Iowa. Well, I guess so. You are the broadcaster in Iowa now. And Alex Cohen was previously there. You want to talk a little bit about the transition? You spent time in Charleston the past five seasons, and
4 seasons, 5 years. COVID kind of robbed us of what should have been my first season there.
yeah. So I guess I want to get into Charleston a little bit too, but uh, as of the last like month or so, I guess, what's it been like being introduced as the voice of the Iowa Cubs, moving halfway across the country? Has it just been a ton? Has it been a lot?
Yeah, it has been. And that's odd to say this time of year because we're so used to being slammed with requests and notifications and things to do during the season. It's kind of rare for that to happen this time of year, but it's all been that in a positive way. It's been a whirlwind, that's for sure. You're in Charleston, South Carolina, where I got married in Charleston. We had a daughter in Charleston. We have another one on the way. So we kind of built our younger lives in Charleston. Despite being from Wisconsin, it kind of feels like home. Fortunately, I got an experience with Iowa last year when Alex made his big league debut at Busch Stadium. I was able to broadcast a game with him in Nashville and then do the two following games on the weekend. So I got to meet Marty Peavy, got to meet the coaching staff. A lot of those guys are back, talked to some of the front office staff as well. And I think that was kind of the first indication that Iowa was, as much as I thought and heard from the outside, a really great organization. Being in it just for 3 days sort of rejuvenated me. And I was like, man, this is really fun and a realistic goal that I would like to get to a place like this, a place like Nashville, a place like Iowa, where people care so much about what's going on. So it was a long process. I kind of knew the job was going to be open. I know Alex pretty well, going back to when we met in the Midwest League when he was in Bowling Green and I was in Quad Cities in Dayton. But just had to wait for it to be officially posted and go through that process. I think the really unique thing about Iowa is that the guy I report to, Randy Wayhofer, is the former broadcaster of the iCubs. So he knows what we're going through better than probably anybody in a management position in minor league baseball. So talking with him was fantastic. And then it was hard to say goodbye when I found out I got the job. You're initially really excited and you can't wait. And then you realize, okay, I've got 2.5 weeks to pack up our whole lives, figure out how to get it 18 hours from Charleston to Des Moines, Iowa, with a 2-year-old, with a dog, with a pregnant wife, and figure it out from there. And that's when you start saying goodbye to people that you've known for the last 5 years. And it becomes really realistic and tough on one side, but really exciting on the other side. But I started about a week before the iCubs announced it. And at that point, things just kind of blew up and I was getting messages from people I'd met everywhere in minor league baseball. And it was a lot, but it was really cool.
I was going to ask you about that the weekend essentially that you had with Iowa last year, right? And that kind of it kind of operates like a mini like internship, like shadowing session where like it preps you, like a little bit better like what you're getting yourself into when you're accepting this job, and more familiar with the faces around the team too, which is good. Like Marty Peavy's back this year, which is no surprise. He's become a staple of that Iowa Cubs organization, obviously. So, what a unique situation to be able to kind of fill in for Alex last year and get that experience.
It was outstanding, and that was, like I said and like you alluded to, just a huge step in the process, if you will, before there even was a process. I remember sitting after the first game, a Friday night in Nashville. Marty, I just sat down in his office and we just talked for 45, 50 minutes. And I had no clue. It felt like 5 minutes. And all of a sudden it was 11 p.m. And I'm texting my wife like, okay, I'm going to leave the stadium now. But just chatting with him, a guy that's been around baseball as long as he has, was really cool and got me excited to hopefully have a chance to do this. And it was an odd series because Moises Ballesteros was in the future game at the time, so he was not there. Owen Casey was banged up. So they were pretty shorthanded. I think they were playing 3 catchers that weekend in different spots on the field. So it wasn't the true experience of the iCubs, but I know that, it was really cool to see those guys now knowing where I am today and having a chance to see them on a more frequent basis.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into some of those players later because you're going to have a stacked roster in Iowa this year. But I'll give you a chance to. I mean, we've alluded to Alex Cohen a few times here. I'll give you a chance to either talk some trash about Alex or all the good things about Alex Cohen. I know that actually my game plan here is the next over the course of this month for listeners out there. Over the course of this month, we're doing affiliate previews of all four previews. I reached out to Alex. I said, hey, one last run. He's probably been the guy that's been on this show, on my podcast, more than any other guest. And so I reached out to him. I go, hey, how about one last run? You preview the Iowa Cubs, and then I'll never let you back on the show. He said, all right, that sounds good. So you want to talk a little bit about Cohen?
Yeah, I would love to talk more trash than I would good things. Unfortunately, the Eagles beat the Packers in the Super Bowl or on the way to the Super Bowl, so I can't really touch him there, which makes things a little bit tougher. But in all honesty, I mentioned I met him. It was 2016 or 2017 when he was in Bowling Green, like a couple years before he got the Iowa Cubs job. And since that point, he's just been a great friend. And the cool thing is, you talk to anybody around minor league baseball, really anybody around the Cubs organization, they'll say the same thing about him. Just a nice guy that is really good at what he does and wants to help other people. And you won't find somebody on social media or in person or talking face-to-face that's trying to help or is more supportive of minor league broadcasters getting opportunities at the big league level. And it's cool that he was finally able to get that opportunity, whether it's a little bit overdue or not. It's really cool that he now has the chance to do that. And the best part is, even though he's, done some of these awesome things, he's still, supportive of the other people in minor league baseball. And I don't know why he was so open to me being a close friend and trying to help me in my career, but he's been a huge help since back when I first met him in 2016 or 2017. And I don't think I would be here without him. And there's a lot of people who wouldn't be where they are or wanting to stay in minor league baseball without the way he sort of boosts up the entire industry. And I'm really excited to see, what ends up happening with his career and how far he can go as well. But it's tough shoes to fill. It's always easy to follow a guy that nobody likes, right? It makes you look a lot better. So I'm not going to try and reinvent the wheel here and just try and pick up where he left off and hopefully keep it at the same level.
Yeah, he deserves all the good things that keep coming his way. He's been maybe one of the most vocal supporters of this show and the work that we do here. So obviously can't thank Alex enough for everything. But like I said, we'll hear from him one more time, at least one more time on this show. So, so you spent the last few years in Charleston. You got the chance to sit across the booth from Sam Weiderhaft. So we can move on from Alex Cohen to Sam Weiderhaft. I know you can talk some trash about Sam Weiderhaft.
I've been waiting for that. I knew that we were eventually going to get there. I'll start out with the nice stuff. I think Sam is obviously tremendously talented, great voice, and a young guy in this industry that I met during his first year in minor league baseball in 2021 with Myrtle Beach. And we played Myrtle Beach, 35 times that year because we played 4 teams all season.
Yeah.
And then years after that, we met Myrtle Beach in the playoffs in 22 and 23. I always got the last laugh in those. So we'll start there with the trash talk. I remember distinctly in 2023, we split the first 2 games of the series. So we played a decisive game 3 in Myrtle Beach, and he was in the production room there in Pelicans ballpark. And I walked in to talk to him, and they were playing a video that was going to be played when they clinched a spot in the championship. So he turned around and saw me, and he turned white as a ghost. And he's like, we got to turn it off. We have to turn it off. And I'm like, no, play it. So we watched it. And that was the game the River Dogs scored 7 or 8 runs in the 3rd inning. And people who were watching the game on MILB TV were texting me like, is the Myrtle Beach broadcaster okay? Because he was just completely depressed. And I felt bad for him in the end, but that's what he gets for, watching the championship clinching video ahead of time. But Sam I always look forward to trips to Myrtle Beach. I always give him a hard time. It's a long held belief of mine that when the teams clear benches, you should have to fight the person on the other team that does your job.
I love that.
And I think I could take Sam. If you've met him in person, let's just say he probably can't dunk.
Hey, he might be a little scrappy.
Yeah, that's a good word. He's scrappy, albeit vertically challenged. But we would go mini golfing in Myrtle Beach all the time. It's the mini golf capital of the world. We would do that. The best part is the windows in the Myrtle Beach press box on the visiting side don't open very well. So he has to stand on a table to lift it open. And it's perfect for a guy his size to jump up on there and open that window. And, I think he's got a really bright future. And I know that Cubs fans have kind of gotten to see that over the last few years, especially with the games being on marquee. But I'm going to certainly miss seeing him every couple of weeks down south.
Yeah, man, he was one. Watching a lot of different MILB broadcasts over the years, home and away, obviously. I get lots of away broadcasts. I've listened to you for the last several years as well, but lots of away broadcasts. There are a lot of people that come in and you can tell it's their first gig, their first year as a broadcaster. With Sam, you could not back in 2021. Like you couldn't tell that it was his first go at this, and he's really, really good at this job. And that's something that and we talk about on this show a lot, is that we are blessed with a lot of really good broadcasters in this organization. And so that makes our watching and listening on a nightly basis that much easier, because we're listening to some really, really good guys call these games. So your time in Charleston, you saw a lot of the Myrtle Beach Pelicans, like you said. I got to ask, what's the best, what's your favorite uniform that the Pelicans wore? Because they have a lot of different. They got the Pirate Pelican uniforms, or the Pirate uniforms. They got the Palmetto State uniforms. They got the Baby Blues. They got a lot of good uniforms that they kick out there.
I think the black Pirate Pelican skull was awesome and underused, because they wore it on Thursdays.
Yeah, later
on during my time in the Carolina League. But I think that the black is just a clean look when you have white pants. That was a really good look, and they were kind of newer, so they have a little bit more color to them. Minor league baseball, you wear the same jersey for 5 or 6 years, and the baby blue isn't quite baby blue anymore. It's starting to fade. But I thought the black, and they had a separate intro video for those jerseys that was kind of edgier. I thought it was a great idea, and something that I think all teams can kind of learn from.
Yeah, I think that's the favorite among most fans for sure. So you cut your teeth. I mean, you've been through minor league baseball, right? I mean, you mentioned so obviously we got Charleston. We were talking before about you spent some time in Dayton. You spent some time in Quad Cities. You spent time in unaffiliated ball when St. Paul was unaffiliated. Wichita was unaffiliated. You bounced around. Talk about that experience, bouncing around from place to place, and I guess the experience that you got in those different places.
Normally, you don't want a resume that has 2 years here and 2 years there. But I think I kind of set out with a plan when I got out of college. Number one, I wanted to be in pro baseball. So my first year was an intern in St. Paul. They were at the time, independent baseball in the American Association, not in shiny new CHS Field where the iCubs will go several times, but Midway Stadium, very small, cramped. One of my jobs was watering the flowers every morning and then broadcasting the game at night. But Sean Aronson, who's still their broadcaster, made his big league debut last year. Just a tremendous person to learn from. And I had 4 or 5 offers that year, teams that I interviewed with. And I picked St. Paul, even though they weren't affiliated, because I thought he could help me get started. And so from there, I wanted to be a number one. And that opportunity came in Wichita with the Wingnuts, who, again, are now affiliated but were independent at the time. It was a great experience for for your first job. We won the championship the first year. There were former big leaguers. Brent Cleveland was there. Andy LaRoche played for us. A couple of other guys that were really impactful. And our manager there, Kevin Hooper, is now one of the big time player development people for the Braves and one of the nicest people I've ever met in baseball. He texted me right away when I got this job. So that was a tremendous experience. But from there, I knew that they were looking at going to affiliated ball, so I couldn't stick around there for a long time. And everybody wants to be in affiliated baseball. I was hoping to get a number 1 job, but I took a number 2 job in Dayton with another guy who had been around a long time, and Tom Nichols. And Dayton's phenomenal. They sell out every game. They had the longest streak in North America. So to be there was incredible. Saw a lot of good players there. Tyler Stevenson, Nick Senzel, TJ Friedel, all kinds of guys who are now with the Reds and elsewhere in Major League Baseball. I was hoping to be there 1 year. They had a track record of guys going on to getting a job the next year. But it was a terrible year for jobs opening up. So I went back and was a number 2 for a second year. By this point, I'm feeling like I'm old, really old to be in that league at 25 or 26, whatever it was, as a number 2. But things happen for a reason. I met Alex in one of those years. And from there, got the number 1 job in Quad Cities, not too far from here in Des Moines. That was an Astros affiliate, ton of good players again that went on to be part of that World Series team. Say what you want to about those World Series teams, but most of those guys were in the minor leagues when you know what I'm talking about was happening. But Jeremy Pena was with us, Christian Javier, all kinds of really good players, Luis Garcia. So it was really cool to be around that organization. And then went to Charleston. They're owned by the same group that owns St. Paul. And so that was kind of my in there. And the last 5 years in Charleston were great, not only because of the city. You've got beaches within a half hour, a million things to do for kids and really dog friendly. So my dog was happy to be there. But also, I mean, if there's one thing the Rays do well, it's they have great minor league teams and great player development. And so they hadn't won a championship in 99 years. And I got there and we won 3 in a row. And people were like, dude, this is ridiculous. So I have 4 championship rings. I know the I-Cubs haven't won since 93, and that's the 3rd longest drought in minor league baseball. So I'm not trying to raise any pressure on myself, but I wouldn't mind one ring for my thumb, which would really upset a lot of other people that I've worked with.
I mean, you're bringing some good luck with you, that's for sure. So
that's the plan, but I don't want to, I don't want that to get out there too much. I guess I probably shouldn't have said it here then, but there's a few people in the office here in Iowa that have been around for 30 years and have never had a championship ring. So they put all their eggs in my basket for this year.
You mentioned the Christian Javier was there in Quad Cities when you were there, right?
Yes.
I got a Christian Javier bobblehead sitting back behind me on my shelf from one of the games that I went to over in Quad Cities. So they definitely tout him over there.
There's a good story. He didn't speak a lot of English when he was there. Very quiet guy, sort of intimidating, and he still is sort of he just stares right through you. So he got promoted from Quad Cities on like a Thursday morning and flew to Fayetteville, which was their high affiliate at the time. So it was my job to make sure guys got to the airport. And then after that, whatever happens. So we get him to the airport at like 6 a.m. And in the afternoon, Fayetteville calls us. And they're like, where's Christian Javier? And I'm like, well, we left him at the airport in the Quad Cities. I don't know. So for like an hour, they couldn't find him. And nobody knew where he was. He didn't speak English, really.
Yeah.
So people were panicking. And I don't know where he was. He was wandering around the airport somewhere in Fayetteville or whatever airport they fly into. But eventually they found him. And I guess the Astros are probably glad they did. Yeah,
I was going to say. So and you couldn't be blamed for anything, which is also good.
I dropped him off, and I had proof of it. So from that point, I'm clear.
You mentioned Dayton. I went to several games out at Dayton when I was living out in that area, and I remember going to a Dayton game against South Bend. It was like a Wednesday night, and it was like sold out. And I remember showing up to the game. And I didn't realize that Dayton had that long like sellout streak and they get as good of crowds as they do. And I showed up to the game and I was like, holy cow. I was like, why are there this? And it wasn't like a special like promotional night. It wasn't anything. It was just a Wednesday night game. And I was looking around the crowd, I was like, this place is packed. It was insane. It's a really cool atmosphere. It's a nice ballpark, really cool atmosphere. I mean, I think Dayton just in general has good fans. I know that Dayton basketball, like University of Dayton basketball is huge as far as their fandom goes. They host the first four for the NCAA tournament every year. Like fandom in Dayton must be like no joke.
They do a lot of things really well that are more major league because of that. So number one, and this is kind of the goal of every minor league team, if you could, their big league team is an hour away. So the Reds are in Cincinnati. It's literally an hour drive on a highway. So you're there in no time. So that helps. Barry Larkin is like a special assistant to the GM. So he's in town some. That obviously helps. But the unique thing there is they don't have to do promotions because they're sold out by season tickets by the time opening day hits. So their ticket sales people do a great job. Their marketing, and they sell all of their seats by opening day. Like they're gone. You can't get single game tickets unless people are putting them online.
Yeah.
And so they don't do giveaways to get 1,000 people to come. They do giveaways for season ticket holders. So you have to be a season ticket holder to get one because they don't need the walk-up crowd. And because of that, there's no advertising on the outfield walls, which is obviously a minor league staple. That's the way you make money and keep the business afloat. But there, it's forest green walls out there, just like the big leagues, where you just don't have sponsorships on every piece of square footage in the ballpark. So it is a cool place. You don't walk into a single A stadium and think there's going to be a couple of levels of seats, but they have a second deck that's always full. And it's a really nice place in a city, like you mentioned, that has really good sports fans.
Yeah. Dayton ballpark's real nice. The Fort Wayne ballpark, those two ballparks are pretty similar, right? Like that's a nice stadium as well. Like there's some good stadiums in the Midwest League for sure.
The Midwest League is awesome, and it was the East and West were kind of the divide. I was always in Dayton. I was in the East, and you have a lot of really new ballparks there. Fort Wayne, South Bend, after the renovation, is great. You have Dayton. You had Bowling Green did some new things there. The press box was over behind third base, so that always made it a little bit tough to broadcast the game. But you had West Michigan is a really good place. Just a lot of cool ballparks over on that side. And then in the West, it was Clinton and Burlington and Beloit before they built the new stadium. So every year we'd have two-week road trips to the East, and we looked forward to those like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, I bet. The stories I've heard about Beloit before and after are incredible. So
if it rained in Beloit back in the day at Pullman Field, we would schedule a basketball game at the YMCA that night because we knew there was no way they were going to play. And so we played basketball 3 or 4 times a year as a coaching staff because if it rained in the afternoon, we weren't playing baseball.
Well, speaking of YMCA in Beloit, I read a story. I think it was in Baseball America. I gotta get this story from you. I gotta get the story from you about your time in Beloit. You were on a road trip, and I heard you had to spend a little bit of time in the trunk of a vehicle, right?
Yeah. So this was one of those days. That's funny. It rained at 2:00, and there was no way we were going to play. So the coaching staff in Quad Cities decided we were going to the Y to play basketball. And so the bus driver took us there, and he said, "Hey, I can come back in a couple of hours and pick you up." And we're like, "Nah, it's fine. We'll get an Uber or a taxi back to the hotel," which, by the way, was a Roadway Inn that had a bar called the Road Dog inside of it. And it was not a great hotel, to say the least. But we said, we'll be fine. So we went downtown, played basketball at the Y for a couple of hours. The manager was Mickey Story, who's now the Sugarland manager. They won the AAA National Championship last year. Dylan Lawson was the Yankees hitting coach for a year. He was our hitting coach. Pitching coach was Graham Johnson, who was in AAA with the Yankees. So it was a cool staff. We weren't great at basketball, although some of those guys would tell you that they were. But we played basketball for a couple hours, went across the street and ate at a Mexican restaurant. And we got done at like 9 p.m., right about when they were closing. And so we're going to get on an Uber and get back to the hotel. So they're looking for an Uber. They're apparently one doesn't exist in Beloit after 9 p.m. So we're a good 50-minute walk from the hotel on the other side of the river. So we can't do that. So they're calling, the coaches are calling cab companies, and they're like, yeah, we can do it, but it'll be $40 a person. And we're like, we're not doing that. So we started walking down the street, and the coaches are like waving at cars, trying to get them to pick us up. Nobody would stop. One guy rolled down his window. Yeah, nobody, I don't blame him at all. But one guy rolled down his window, and Dylan, our hitting coach, kind of yelled at him. And the guy came back around the block a second time as if he were thinking about it, but he drove away. So now there's nobody downtown. So we sent our bench coach, Rafael Pena, back into the Mexican restaurant where they had just closed. And the waitress who took care of us said, I'll drive you back to the hotel. So the problem was she had a small vehicle. There were 4 or 5 of us. And so I'm like, I'll just go in the trunk. Like,
and you're not small people. I mean, you got some former baseball players. Yeah.
Yeah, Mickey was a big league pitcher. I'm 6'2", and I'm like, you know what? I'll just go in the back. I know my spot here. I'm the broadcaster. Like, I can't go sit shotgun. So we get in the car. I'm riding in the trunk, and Rafael Pena, the bench coach, the girl, we're talking about the hotel. Her friends own the hotel that we're staying in.
Okay.
And she says that, and Rafael Pena just goes, what a terrible hotel. And the rest of us are just like, dude, she said that her friends own the hotel.
She is your ride. You got all the good things you got to say to her. Yeah.
But we made it back to the Roadway Inn, and it was quite the night. I'll never forget that one. In fact, when I got this job, I texted Mickey because we're doing interleague play this year. Sugarland comes to Iowa. And I said, we'll see you in August. And he said, let's get the basketball shoes out and go at it again. And I'm like, no, I'm going to need a wheelchair then.
Yeah. That's not on the docket anymore, huh?
No, that was about 8 years ago, and that's where it's going to stay.
Well, I mean, this is kind of appropriate. I was going to ask you about, I mean, you're obviously, you mentioned with Christian Javier, like you're in charge of travel for all these road trips. That story is a little bit different, but I got to ask you about the worst travel experience you've had, because I know that every single broadcaster I've ever talked to has this awful bus broken down on the side of the road, or I mean, obviously a lot of super early mornings on flights and things like that. What's your worst travel experience that you've had in the minor leagues?
I'm going to regret saying this, but I've never had a bus breakdown.
Oh man,
or anything like that. So
knock on wood.
It'll happen on our first 2-week trip, the first week of April. But we did have a terrible 2 months in Quad Cities in 2019. The Mississippi River, where their stadium is right on the banks of, flooded to record levels. And they have a great system. They put up flood walls. They're ready like weeks in advance. And the ballpark never gets touched. And then they build a walking bridge from the sidewalk over the flood walls so people can get into the stadium. But that year, for whatever reason, the railroad company, there's a railroad that runs along the ballpark, decided whatever they were shipping had to go through there. So they kept building the railroad higher with the flood. So now we couldn't build a walkway, a bridge over. So for the first month and a half, we did not play a single home game in Quad Cities.
Lord.
And the worst part about that is we had commuter trips back then to Burlington, Clinton, and Cedar Rapids. So that a commuter trip, we would drive there, play the game, come back that night, leave again at 1:00 the next day. And they were all an hour and a half from our ballpark. We were getting picked up at the downtown bus station because we couldn't get into our stadium. I remember a week before the season, they said, you can go in one more time. And so me and the groundskeeper got in the bucket of a skid steer, and then they lifted it up like 10 feet in the air, drove through the floodwater, and then like tossed us over the wall. I grabbed everything that I might need for the next 2 months, put it back in the bucket of the skid steer, and then they drove us to our cars. And we played home games in Peoria that year. In Kane County, we played at the University of Iowa. I remember we had Jeremy Pena at shortstop. Like I said, we were on an all-turf field for the first time, and he committed the only 2 errors I think I'd ever seen him commit. Our clubhouse was the visiting basketball locker room
Oh
in
man.
Carver Hawkeye Arena. It was just a really odd month and a half. And the guys are just like, when is this going to end? But we didn't know. Like, whenever the flood started to recede, we could play
Yeah.
there. And it was odd because the field, there's like satellite pictures, everything's underwater, but the field is like this beautiful green diamond in the middle of the city. And the grass was never better because nobody touched it for 3 months.
True.
And so when we finally got back in there, that was the happiest group of guys I'd ever seen.
Yeah, I was gonna say that is weird because like it's not like a stadium renovation where like it'll be complete in X amount of months, right?
Right.
Or on X day. It's just we'll kind of see when we can go back home, and that's rough, man. That's a crazy experience. I do know that it led to you being able to experience a game at in Milwaukee, right? As a part, like calling for that team, is that right?
Yeah, that was really cool. Having grown up about an hour and a half from there, we played Wisconsin, the Timber Rattlers, in Miller Park at the time, on like a Tuesday or Wednesday night. The rest of the series was then up in Appleton, where the Timber Rattlers normally play. But it was so cool just to be in that ballpark that I had gone to as a kid. And it's a big league ballpark. It's the first time I had called the game in there. And you walk past Bob Euchre's booth on the way to the auxiliary press box that you're in. There were probably 8 or 10,000 people there, but it felt like 4 because it seats 40,000. I remember distinctly that the Brewers were on the road, and so they didn't turn the heat on. This was in April. They weren't going to turn the heat on because it would have cost a ton to heat the ballpark for nobody in their scale, for nobody to be in there. But they had to open the panels in center field to like let the grass breathe. So they opened it up during batting practice. It was like 40 degrees. And so then the whole game, we were inside. The roof was closed, but we were playing in like 45-degree
Oh
weather.
man.
It was kind of a cool experience, though. My family and a whole bunch of people from my hometown came, and you don't get to do those kind of things all that often.
That's pretty cool. I just got one more question that's not. We'll get into some players here. I don't want to keep you too awful long, but
Sure.
one more non-player question, not non-prospect question. I know that with minor league baseball, it is always other duties as assigned. With whether you're a broadcaster or social media or whatever you're doing, you're an intern. Always other duties as assigned. What are some of the other duties as assigned that you've had to experience over the years?
Boy, that's a fun question to think about. I mean, I don't have to think back that far. In Charleston, we had I think we were pretty fortunate, like 35 full-time people there.
Yeah.
But I was the broadcaster in charge of media relations. So any interview requests, game notes, lineups, roster moves, I had to do all that. Opening day is fun because you get there for the morning news shows at 5 a.m. Nobody tells you that you're going to do that when you take the job. So that's the longest day of the season is opening day. You're so excited, but it feels like 7 o'clock is never going to get there. You pull tarp.
Yep.
I was the only person there at the time who could manage our website. So I was doing that on the back end. I hosted our podcast. I was the MC for our hot stove dinner. Just kind of literally anything. I was like I had a joke a day calendar that my wife got me for my birthday, or I'm sorry, for Christmas in December of 23. So every day in Charleston, I went to every office and read the dad joke of the day.
Yes.
And I think that was probably my most important duty of all of that, to tell the dad joke of the day and really sell it if it wasn't very good.
I was gonna say I'm prepping the dad jokes. I'm trying to accumulate as many dad jokes in preparation for this May as possible. So I can understand that.
Well,
I'm
I'll give you
researching.
one real quick.
What you got?
I'll give you one. Why do Norwegian ships have barcodes on them?
Why?
So they can Scandinavian.
No, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Favorite.
Man.
It's a great calendar. I recommend it.
Yeah, I'll need to hop on Amazon and get a dad joke a day calendar for sure. All right, man. So we talked about it quite a bit. You spent time in Charleston. You got to see the Myrtle Beach Pelicans a lot. What were some players? I'll just open it up kind of broadly. We'll dig into some more players here in more detail. But what were some Cubs prospects that caught your eye specifically over the past few years that really you're still thinking about today, whether they're still in the system or not? I guess.
Well, I'm going to go back to last year. He's not in the system anymore, and I know that's a contentious point, but Cam Smith came to Charleston without any professional home runs and then hit a home run on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And, I should have brought this up, but I'm going to do it now. Sam was not at that series, and he was irate that I was calling Cam Smith's first home run and then the second one, and then eventually 6 in a row. And every time it happened, he would text me, "You've got to be kidding me," with a few other choice words in there. So that was obviously really impressive. And I know he's off to a great start with Houston, but he obviously jumped off the page.
Yeah.
Other than that, there's some obvious guys. Moises Ballesteros looked advanced beyond his years when he was there. And again, I think he's in a little bit better shape now. But when he first came up in Myrtle Beach, you were like, everybody was talking about him, but you're going, that guy. And then the ball jumps off his bat and you're like, okay, this is a problem. I think James Triatos was great during his year in Myrtle Beach. We didn't see Cade Horton, but I know he dominated for the short time he was there. We actually had a game rained out that he was supposed to pitch against us on opening weekend in 23. So I'm excited to hopefully see him get to throw before too long here and kind of get back that opportunity. I think the Jaguar was very impressive in his year in Myrtle Beach. See, I didn't know what he was doing at that point in time because he was young. And I do remember that, Charleston was a Yankees affiliate before COVID. And so I took that job thinking it was a Yankees team. So I was prepared for him to be on our roster along with the Martian. So we could have had the Jaguar and the Martian, Jason Kempf and Kevin Alcantara together, and we ended up getting neither. But it was kind of cool to see him now back in Charleston in a different light and a guy that I remember our coaches absolutely hated when he came to the plate. And the other guy who's not with the Cubs anymore and was never a big prospect, but absolutely killed the River Dogs was Jacob Wetzel. Like the River Dogs were the best team in the league every year, and they could not get him out to save their lives. It was insane.
And Wetzel was one of the most fun if you're a fan of the Cubs, of the Pelicans, Jacob Wetzel was one of the most fun players to watch. And I'd imagine from the other perspective that he's one of the most frustrating players to watch just because of the way that he hits, right? It's not just how he's performing, but the way that he hits. His defense in the outfield was super fun. That's Jacob Wetzel was a fun guy to follow and watch.
Yeah, he's like a cult hero down there in Myrtle Beach. He was there for parts of 3 years.
Yeah.
And every year I saw him on the roster, and I'm like, I would text Sam, like, how is this guy still there? He never gets out. So what does he got to do? But, there were Pablo Aliendo. They weren't great in 2021, but he was really good that year. And there's a chance to be in Iowa at some point soon. So just some guys that I hated seeing come to the plate, but now I'll be much more excited when they get in the batter's box.
I want to go back to that Cam Smith streak, the 6 home run streak, because you got lots of media, social media pub that week, right? Because MLB Pipeline and MLB, I think at MLB posted about Cam Smith's streak, I think.
Yeah.
And obviously you were on the call for all of those home runs. And it's so interesting because this is Cam Smith in your ballpark. You're on the broadcast for your team, which is his opponents. And I thought you did an awesome job. I thought you did a terrific job where you're kind of balancing the fact that this is against your team that you're calling games for, but it's also an incredibly exciting thing that you're watching happen. How on earth do you do that? How do you balance that? Is it something that you're doing anyways, or for that specific moment you're like, man, I really got to lock in on this moment?
It's a fine line to walk. It's the same thing with a no-hitter when the other team's throwing it.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, obviously, you're on the road, and so you don't have the MILB TV call necessarily of it at times. But you just have to walk that line. because you're the only TV broadcaster of the game, right? So as much as you're the River Dogs broadcaster and in your heart you want them to win, something pretty cool is happening. And there's just as many, and in that case, there's more Cubs fans watching than there are Rays fans probably. So number one, it's a high draft pick. And then once he hit the third one, every at bat, you're like, okay, this is a pretty big deal. That week, not to take anything away from him, Charleston is a terrible hitter's ballpark. There's a river in right field, and the wind's always blowing in, and it's a large ballpark. That week, the wind was blowing out harder than anybody had ever seen it. And so, and again, not to take anything away, he was connecting, but if somebody put it in the air with any kind of barrel, you felt like it had a chance. And to his credit, he just kept on putting barrels on the baseball, and they kept flying. And it was funny. Our manager, Sean Smedley, every day he'd come in and he'd come out of the dugout, look at the flagpole, and he goes, "What did we do to deserve this?" And you're like, you're not going to pitch around a guy in single A in the regular season. And guys wanted to get him out. They just couldn't do it. But it was a really cool experience. And that was another thing that let me know that the Cubs fan base, especially in terms of prospects, was different than just about anybody else, because I made one tweet about Cam Smith having more home runs than like 60 teams in minor league baseball that month in that week. And it just blew up. And I was like, okay, these are people that actually care about what's going on. So it was really cool.
Yeah, no, I think that is interesting that the wind was blowing out and all that was happening during that week. I mean, because I think that Charleston is the only ballpark. I mean, that league is rough on hitters in general, but I think Charleston is the only team in the league that had worse park factors for hitters than Myrtle Beach. I think it was Charleston and then Myrtle Beach were the two worst in the league, which is crazy.
Yeah, and Charleston didn't hit any home runs, and that's part of it. It's also part of it that guys like Xavier Isaac and Trey Morgan left. Those guys kind of help. But, yeah, it's not friendly at all. So for him to come in there and do that was pretty eye-opening in that park.
I was looking at that it was that same week. It was that last time Myrtle Beach traveled to Charleston last year. And I saw that Cam Smith was in the lineup, obviously, that week, but so was Alfonso Rosario was in the lineup quite a bit, and Juan Bello pitched and pitched well that week. It's like those are all three guys that are no longer in the system. They're all three a part of trades this offseason. It's like that's a pretty good testament to this system, and we talk about it all the time. And the how the Cubs can continue to deal from the depth they have in this organization to make the major league team better. But yeah, having Cam Smith, Alfonso Rosario, and Juan Bello all play that week in Myrtle Beach was kind of crazy to see looking back on it now.
Yeah, and that's kind of the idea, right, is to stockpile that talent. And it's funny that we're doing this around when MLB Pipeline announced their top 30 for each organization. You look at the Cubs top 30, and there's a bunch of 17 and 18-year-old shortstops. And you think if they're all that good, only one of them is going to be the shortstop in Chicago someday. So you have great pieces there to deal from. And that's kind of a good problem to have. You're going to have a ton of talent in AAA, and you'd like the look of your big league roster. So it allows you to have some flexibility to do what you want to do. And when you have guys at the lower level too, it's very helpful. But yeah, a lot of good players that were in Myrtle Beach that aren't there anymore and aren't with the Cubs.
One guy I want to get your thoughts on, I know that he had a big week that same week, was Jose Escobar, who was pretty new to the affiliate or to the level at that time. Just any thoughts on Jose Escobar from your experience seeing him that week?
I just thought he's really scrappy, a tough guy to get out. And the Cubs have had those guys, whether they were prospects or not. They've had these guys that are just scrappy hitters that you can't put away. There's a lot of switch hitters that just are tough outs and they show great discipline. And I thought, again, we didn't see a lot of him, but he was really impressive in that series. And Myrtle Beach didn't have a great team last year for a bulk of the year. But late in the year, they had some really interesting pieces that you're like, okay. And I know that he's had some traction here of late on, this could be a guy to look out for. But I thought, he just was driving the ball into the gaps and we couldn't get him out. And I'm like, I don't know what you do at this point. So it'll be fun to see what he does against older, more experienced pitching in the years to come.
Pedro Ramirez fits that description you just had, and you probably saw a lot of him when Pedro was down in Myrtle. So yeah, that's another guy that kind of fits that mold. You mentioned the top 30 prospects. We'll end with this here. You mentioned the top 30 prospects at MLB Pipeline just dropped. We're recording this on Tuesday the 4th. It dropped today, actually. So go check that out over Jim Callis and Jonathan Mayo, their work over there. Obviously, that's a must read in terms of the scouting reports and what they have to write up there. You tweeted out that the amount of guys that you could be seeing in Iowa this year. And so I went back to my prospect list and I was looking at the guys that I have. And if you include Matt Shaw, which Matt Shaw is going to spend the majority of the year up in Chicago, but he's a rookie, so like there's still a chance we see him down in Iowa from time to time. So if you're including Matt Shaw in this mix, of my top 21 prospects in the organization, 11 of those guys could spend time in AAA Iowa, which is super exciting. And even of that, like 9 of my top, 9 of my top 12, all of my top 6. Like there's a lot of really good prospects that are going to spend time in AAA Iowa this year. Is there any? I mean, we talked about some of them already. Is there any names that stand out among Owen Casey or Cade Horton or Ballesteros, or any of these guys that you're particularly excited to watch this year in Iowa?
So I've seen a lot of those guys before, like we mentioned. So I think there's
Yeah.
a unique thing from all of them that I saw them as 18 and 19-year-olds that I can't wait to see what they look like as polished guys who have a couple hundred to 1,000 more at bats. Owen Casey being one of those guys. But I think Brandon Birdsell is a guy I never saw that obviously he's jumped up pretty significantly. He's got the interesting arm slot and quick delivery, short arm style. And I think he's going to be really fun to watch earlier in the year. And talking about the amount of high-level guys that are going to be in Iowa, it's pretty rare at the AAA level, right? Because AA has kind of been the spot where prospects make that leap from the next year. Like, Churio did that in Milwaukee, and you've seen Holiday kind of do that with the Orioles in a way, where AA is where all those guys are. So to have – and when you see the teams that are always laden with the most prospects in minor league baseball at the younger levels, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win because they're all very young. But to see that group at AAA, and it has guys in the outfield, the infield, starting pitchers, relievers who have nasty stuff, it gives you an opportunity to think that you're going to have a really good team for the first couple of months. And, of course, all that is always dependent on guys being healthy. But I think Brandon Birdsell is a guy that I've heard a lot about. And I'm excited to see him in person.
Yeah, no, I think that I'm probably a little biased because I've had both these guys on the show this offseason. But Brandon Birdsell and Connor Noland are 2 starting pitchers that will likely spend the entire season in AAA. I mean, I think that there's a good chance that Birdie gets called up to the majors at some point for some depth. But there's also a good possibility that both of those guys just spend the entire year in the rotation in Iowa and like are there for depth to be called up next year to Chicago. Because I think you look at Cade Horton, it's like, all right, when Cade Horton is ready, like he's going to be in Chicago. But Birdie and Connor Noland are 2 guys that they may just mess around and log 140 innings in Iowa, and that's going to be fun for you week in and week out. So that's exciting. But
it is. And you want those guys to get to the big leagues, obviously. But hey, if it makes your time in AAA and the experience at Principal Park that much better for fans, it's obviously good for us. And we didn't even talk about the guys that came over in the trade with the Yankees that had pretty good years at AAA, or a veteran like Carlos Perez who just hits home runs and bats 350 at AAA when Ballesteros isn't behind the plate. Like it could be a really fun roster early in the year and hopefully throughout the summer.
Yeah, I think you're looking at a team that could, like you said, I mean, I think you're setting up the team pretty well for a good little championship run. I don't know, man.
Yeah, I wouldn't have taken this job 2 years ago if I didn't like the look of the roster. That's what it was.
That's incredible. All right, man. Anything else that you wanted to chat about or plug before we wrap this up?
No, I just incredibly thankful for you and everybody else who gave me a tremendous welcome. I've had a great time interacting with everyone, and the welcome has been awesome. And this is, a month before we actually play games. So can't wait to talk to everybody, get to know everybody. Make sure you say hi when you come to Principal Park if you do. And hopefully I can make it to the premier Cubs offseason events here starting next year, like Cubs Con and spring training.
For sure. Jason, thank you so much for coming on, introducing yourself to all the prospect nerds out there. Listeners out there, I posted on social media, but just so you have it here as well, we're looking at a weird posting schedule this month during the month of March. Typically, we do the over the off season, we're releasing every other Tuesday. During the season, we're every Tuesday each week in the mornings. The episodes are released. This month is weird because we have this interview with Jason, and then we have 4 different affiliate previews in preparation for the Iowa Cubs, whose season opener is, remind me, Jason, on the 28th. Is that right?
March 28th, Friday night against the reigning champion Omaha.
There you go. So we kind of have a lot of episodes to fit in. So these episodes will not be released on Tuesday mornings throughout this month. They're going to be kind of scattered all throughout. So just keep checking back all your podcast platforms on YouTube, all that good stuff. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. And we'll be back in your ears very soon in preparation for the 2025 minor league season. Thanks, guys.
Yo.